everybody. Thanks for tuning in today for our live stream class brought to you from the Dennis 70s Lake Oswego break room. If we need to heat up a succulent or two, we've got our microwave on hand. But such is the ways that we're adapting these days, and so we're really thrilled that you're with us this morning, this afternoon, or even watching later for our class on success with indoor succulents and cactus. Now, this indoor focus class is a perfect time to learn about succulents and cactus, whether it's something that you have perhaps tried and had limited success in the past, or if you are a succulent collector or a cactus fanatic. Hopefully there'll be things that you'll learn from today's class as well. But it is clear that the kind of joy of succulents has been around for several years, and the popularity of growing indoor succulents has really exploded over the last, 5-6 years now. The current kind of houseplant craze that we're seeing, and we can call it a craze. I'm crazy for houseplants. So, the popularity of people growing indoor plants as a resurgence these days was really started several years ago by the interest that people took in indoor succulents. And so we have to thank those little 2-inch succulents for kind of, kickstarting a whole new revitalized trend in indoor foliage and growing plants indoors. So thank you, succulents. The interesting thing I think that I find with succulents is that you can come in, that it is that it's really critical to understand that succulents grow. And when we first see them and first experience them, usually in garden centers, they're in small pots and they're young starts. So although the containers are small and the plants are small, the plan ultimately is that they will grow. So when we pick them out in these cute little containers, we may not have the expectation that they will change. And that is kind of first and foremost in understanding how to care for succulents. They are going to grow. They are going to get taller, they're going to get wider, and they're going to change from their original shape and size as they mature. So when they may outgrow their container, they may crowd their neighbors as they grow. They may get taller than you expected. Even kind of all of the leaves may grow taller and leave sort of a stem that's devoid of leaves, or what looks almost like a succulent tree, for example. So this little succulent this is an aeonium. My hand's empty. This aeonium began as a short plant low to the ground, so it looked more like the profile of this plant here when it was first started. And as it's grown, it's gotten taller, and as it's gotten taller, the large amount of growth on top has shaded the stem below it and has caused the lower leaves to fall off as the plant grows up. So we can see, if I bring it close to the camera, we can see lines on the stems, and each of the lines or scars on the stems show where the leaves were when they were attached to the stem. And we even see one dried up leaf that's sitting in here in the container that has fallen off of the plant. So as it grows, it's developed a little trunk, and then all of the interesting foliage and everything is up top here. We see another leaf that's ready to fall off. I can just give it a little help. It's kind of shriveled and wilted. Obviously doesn't get enough light down here and is now fallen off. So kind of giving us that look of a trunk. Now you could do a couple of things with a succulent that grows tall like this if you want to get back to either a shorter succulent, or you don't like the fact that there's just a bunch of dirt and kind of empty space down here. One would be that you could underplant the bottom of the succulent with either the same succulent or a different variety by putting small leaves just onto the soil surface and allowing them to root. So you could grow one lower succulent in the base and another succulent up top. Or we could trim this plant. So believe it or not, if we cut this plant high up towards where the end of the foliage stops, we cut this with our pruners, take off a couple of leaves, and then set the top just on moistened cactus soil, it will root over time. So this top would root back down low on the ground, and then it would start the process over again, where it grows slowly up taller and loses leaves on the bottom. So you could just chop it and drop it, or you could underplant it, or even leave it as it is. And what's likely to happen slowly over time is that this plant still will develop another few, like a rosette on top. It'll develop more rosettes around the base and potentially even off of the lower portions that get better light exposure as the plant grows taller. So many of us have experienced one of our succulents that started as a tight little rosette that's gotten taller, and maybe even as it gets taller it starts to lean or it gets a little top heavy, and we're not sure what to do. So we're going to cover that today, and kind of how to propagate, how to refresh and renew your succulents as well. But one of the, let's get classification out of the way, because we have succulents and we have cactus. And although their care is quite similar between succulents and cactus, that like similar conditions, the differences are that all cactus are succulent in nature. So being succulent just means that you have a thick fleshy leaf that is full of kind of cells that are full of moisture. So the plant itself holds moisture within the leaves instead of storing moisture as much in the root system. And these plants are used to going long periods between rains or receiving water, so that allows them to store reserves and then access reserves from their own foliage instead of relying on rainfall or moisture to wet them. So all cactus have that same storage, water storing ability of a succulent, but not all succulents are cactus. And the difference is a part of the plant that's called an aerial, and the aerial is the white cushion on a cactus from which usually spines emerge. So we see the white cushion at the base, and then we see spines that come from it. The cushion is the aerial, and we can also see that on a spinier cactus here, where all of the spines originate from a little white fuzzy dot on the cactus called an aerial. So these are officially cactus. Some cactus don't have as many spines as others, like the first one I just showed, but cactus have aerials whether they have spines or not. Are all succulents, but not all succulents are cactus. So really just, you want to strut your botanical knowledge. There you have the classification of who's who and what is the difference. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties between succulents and cacti or cactus, and most often when you buy them at garden centers, they are not labeled by their specific names. So many times you can ask a plant expert or a salesperson if they know the name, and they can help you with the identification. But there's a lot of great sources online to also just look at different cactus, compare their aerial arrangement, the spine length, spine colors, that kind of thing, to try to get down to the identification. regardless of whether you know the name of your succulent or your cactus or not, there's some real basic care and growing conditions that we can talk about that are gonna apply pretty wholesale to all of them. And the first and most critical is light. So although we grow these plants indoors, most of us realize that indoors is not their preferred place, nor the place that they come from in nature. So these are all outdoor plants somewhere in the world where they live in, again, arid conditions, usually with poor soil or fast draining soil or sandy soil and infrequent rains. But they can, depending on the cactus, some and succulents, some can tolerate cold nights. So many cactus come from desert environments where the nighttime temperature drops significantly from the daytime temperature. And then we have succulents, for example, that come from warmer environments where they don't exactly go down to freezing conditions. And these would be the types that we would consider annual in Portland, Oregon, simply because they're not hardy enough to grow outdoors during the winter. A combination of the cold as well as the constant moisture that they would get kind of contributes to just a general demise of outdoor succulents over the winter, and especially of the non-hardy or non-winter hardy ones. So something like this little guy here is going to be, could grow outdoors during the spring and summer, but needs to be brought in before it freezes and grown inside. When they do come inside, ideally we are giving our cactus and succulents the brightest light we have in the house. Now that doesn't necessarily mean direct sunlight on the plant, but indirect bright light or highlight is critical. Some cactus can take bright light or direct light, but they should be kind of acclimated to that. And if they haven't experienced direct sunlight on them and you put them straight out into full sun, even a cactus could sunburn before it's kind of gotten used to that kind of light intensity. But bright light indoors can be found ideally the best lighting comes from our south-facing windows. So south-facing windows are going to give you the brightest light year-round, even in winter when the sun is lower in the south sky. So that's an important place. You may even need to move succulents that grow well spring and summer to the south windows for winter, just to make sure that they're getting the sunlight that they need at that time of year. The one window that does not provide you with highlight or bright light would be a north-facing window. Even really in the peak of summer, north windows are just not bright enough to really grow most of our cactus and succulents well. East and west-facing windows are your second best. I guess I would say south is first best, west would be second best. East is a good window as well, but you need to be really right in the windowsill if possible to get the brightest light. And even then, your plants will kind of realize that the window is their light source and they'll grow towards the window. So it's a good idea still to sort of rotate your cactus or your succulent by turning it every time you water it, at least, so that it grows balanced instead of sort of shaping itself toward the source of light that it receives. The amount of light that your succulents receive and your cactus gets is directly correlated to how much water they need. So in slightly lower light, you will water less frequently than in high light conditions. And then the same with like dry indoor air or a dry warm room, you'll be watering a little bit more frequently than moist like high humidity air or a cooler room. It is also important to acknowledge that there are seasonal variations in water usage for the cactus and succulents, just like for other indoor plants. So we have like an active growing season, which would be March through September, active growing season. Then October through February is a dormant period. And even indoors, the succulents and cactus will slow their growth they will be using their reserves, so they're drawing upon that succulent nature that they have to use the moisture that they've collected and stored. And if we continue to water at the same frequency that we did in spring and summer, by slowing their growth and the plants needing less water, that may lead to an overwatering, which can cause all kinds of crown rot and root rot problems. So we want to back off on our watering as we go into the dormant months as well. It is important that cactus and succulents go dry between waterings. So your frequency is going to be a lot less often that you water than you would with tropical plants and indoor foliage plants. And in spring and summer you can water them fairly deeply, which would be giving them enough water over the top that it runs out the bottom of the container, and you can feel that the container is being weight and the soil has retained some of the moisture. In winter, or fall and winter, it's better to not water so that it runs out, but to really just give them a little bit of water instead. So it might be, for a plant this size, it might be 2 or 3 tablespoons even of water every couple of weeks, or maybe even once a month, to keep them hydrated. It is possible to water like every 2 months in the winter time. So it is, it's a surprise how frequent or how infrequently you can water. I had 2 succulents in this size container. This is a 2-inch pot. When I live my normal life, I travel around a lot with a lot of plants in my car doing all kinds of projects. And occasionally a plant tumbles under the driver's seat or gets somehow misplaced within my vehicle. And a few years ago, I was cleaning out my car in December, and I came across 2 2-inch succulents that had tumbled underneath the driver's seat and were partially hidden. They'd been in my car since October, and I was pulling them out in December. Clearly they had limited light and they had not been watered in 2 months, and they were fine. Both cactus had kind of turned themselves because they were laying on their side, so they had grown a different shape, but they hadn't been watered in 2 months. I did, discover them, brought them in the house, gave them some water, and they revived beautifully. They barely showed any harm in the first place. So if we water too regularly, we can kill them, but really watering less frequently, it's shocking how long you can keep a plant happy by that just infrequent watering. Now, a lot of people know that cactus and succulents don't like too much water, so I often hear people's response to that by saying that they mist or use a spray bottle to mist their succulents and cactus, and I generally discourage that. The act of misting gets too much moisture on the foliage of the plant and just wets a lot of the leaves without getting enough really down into the soil. And some cactus and succulents can be fuzzy. Where's my fuzzy? Here's a fuzzy. So both of these, we've got a spider's web or cobweb sempervivum here that looks like it's all covered in cobwebs. That's part of the plant, so that's the plant's own hair or fuzz. And then we've got our little bear's paw succulent, which is very fuzzy and soft. And the little tiny hairs on these will hold more moisture as you spray them, and then keep the leaves wetter than we would prefer, or than the plant would prefer, which can precipitate rot or lead to some overwatering and stem and crown rot problems. So rather than misting or spraying your cactus, it's better to actually put water right down into the soil, even trying not to get the plant wet as much as possible. So getting the water down into the soil, and if it's really dry, that may mean that it's better to bottom water. So during spring and summer we can do this. I wouldn't bottom water in the winter time, but bottom watering would be taking a bowl or a container and putting about 1 inch of water in the container, then taking your dry plant with drainage holes in the bottom of its pot and sitting it down inside the container that has the water in it. So as this sits here for maybe 10-15 minutes, it's going to wick moisture up from the bottom of the soil and the holes in the bottom of the container, and then the moisture is going to head up through just evaporation or transpiration up into the rest of the soil. So in 15 or 20 minutes when we pick this up out of the water, it's going to feel heavier. We'll let it fully drip dry. We should probably have less water then in our container. Already we have less water in our container. And then this would be considered fully watered for probably the next almost month or so. So bottom watering on something like this, especially when the soil is kind of pulled away from the edges of the pot, it's difficult when you apply water from the top to make sure that the soil absorbed enough as the water passed through. So if you're watering even and you just don't feel a weight difference or that the soil has absorbed the water, bottom watering every so often can help to really hydrate the plant well. But then remember that it's been so well hydrated that you could probably wait just a little bit longer between the next time that you would apply water. Watering can, knowing when your plant needs water can be very difficult. And I know that a lot of people, we like to use kind of a pattern or a calendar or a schedule. With cactus and succulents, you could even, that's so infrequent that you could set up like a phone reminder or, check them on the 1st and the 15th of the month, when you get paid or when you pay your bills or whatever that is, on some sort of frequency to just, check them and make sure that they're doing okay. There are signs of trouble that you should be able to recognize right away, and there are signs of the plant needing water that are easy to recognize as well. A lot of people for our tropical plants use moisture meters, which are kind of a gauge that shows how much water is in the soil, has a little dial, and a metal probe or a stick that we would stick down into the soil to get a reading on the moisture content. But it's very difficult in these little pots or in the shallow pots of cactus and succulents to use a moisture probe for that reason. So not only do we use like the weight of the plant, but we also use signs that the plant is giving us that shows that it is ready to be watered. So usually, I gotta get close to the camera for this, so usually the leaves of succulents are stiff and fleshy and somewhat shiny and full. So when you squeeze them, they have a resistance to them. They don't wrinkle, they don't like collapse under your touch. So this one here is well hydrated, and all of the leaves look smooth and shiny, and they feel right as I touch them. This succulent here is on the dry side, and hopefully you can see that pretty well in the video. Not only do we see some of the leaves even drooping, so the leaves are drooping where they should be nice and stiff, but they're also a little bit puckered or wrinkled looking. Down here you can really see, can you see that one? So wrinkled and puckered looking, and if you squeeze them or touch them, they're soft and they're able to be like curled or manipulated much easier than the well-watered plant. So this is giving us all of the signs that it is used, and then of course we can double check how dry the root ball is. So very dry, very lightweight. It's giving us all the signs that it's ready for a drink. Dry soil, lightweight, puckered leaves, even a little bit of wilt. And so for this guy, instead of actually trying to water it over the top, is a good candidate to bottom water. So we'll set it right here in our container, and then I'll move on to a couple of other topics, and then maybe we'll revisit this towards the end of class and see if it looks any different that fast. See how fast they can regenerate. Fertilizer is a basic nutrient that most plants need. Now, cactus and succulents don't need a lot of fertilizer. So they're pretty light feeders. Let's say they have like a low metabolism. They're relatively slow growers. The ideal fertilizer for them is going to be something that has a low first number, so low nitrogen content. Nitrogen is what pushes kind of green leafy growth in plants or rapid expansion of the plant. And if we saw a lot of nitrogen to our succulents, they wouldn't grow so like tight and congested. They would grow long and big leaves and even maybe floppy and what we would call soft, because it would have too much nitrogen, creating that kind of rocket growth of leaves. So low in nitrogen, that first number, but higher in phosphorus and potassium, the second two numbers. So phosphorus is responsible for root development and later on for flowers and even for fruits. If you've got cactus that you're hoping to bloom, or even like a puntia or prickly pear cactus, you actually want to eat the prickly pears. Giving them a little bit of bloom power is going to help to get that bloom set. The final number is potassium, and potassium is really like an overall health stimulant. It's for just plant vitality. It also helps them to regulate stresses like lack of water or too much water, changes in temperature, helps with their cold hardiness, and also just metabolism of the other nutrients. So an important kind of all around. This liquid cactus plant food here is 277 as far as its numbers go. This can be fed every time, given to the plant every time you water, or you could do a higher concentration of this that's just added to your watering, whether it's added to the bottom water that we would give our plants or to our watering can as we water, maybe every 2 weeks or something like that. So you can do a light solution or a more concentrated solution depending on how frequently you would be watering and feeding the plants. The use of fertilizer for cactus and succulents is best again during that active growing period, so that March through September, not during the winter dormancy months when we water less and we fertilize less. The temperature and humidity that succulents and cactus prefer, it can, as I said in the beginning, can vary depending on which plants you're growing. Most true cactus can tolerate colder winter temperatures, but they also are better able to tolerate colder temperatures as long as they're dry. So cold and wet combined is detrimental to most cactus or succulents. They could take wet with heat and warmth or cold with dry, but you put those two things together and you often then see the plant go downhill rapidly. And humidity is not an important requirement for most succulents and cactus because they grow in areas where usually it's very dry and very arid. So we don't need to worry about low humidity in our homes during the winter months when we're running, heaters and fireplaces and things. You don't need to spritz them or mist them, like I mentioned. They're fine with dry indoor air. In fact, they prefer it. It's one thing to love the cactus and succulents for their chubby little leaves and their cool textures and the various colors that their foliage has. But then on top of that, all succulents and cactus bloom at least once a year, and that just makes them even better. So we see a range of flowers that come from the different plants, and they all look a little different. So here again, my little echeveria. This echeveria has put out a flower spike, and it has a very delicate looking little bloom at the top of its flower spike, but it's not going to continue to bloom and keep blooming. The flower is not what we fall in love with this plant for. I mean, we have this amazing chalky blue foliage. It's chunky and just makes you want to kind of squeeze their little leaves. We see, of course, the biggest, most mature plant, probably the first plant to grow. And back to the original plant I was showing you, how it starts to develop that trunk lower on. You see the scars on the trunk where the leaves have fallen off. And from there, we've had smaller leaves come from the base to start to fill in and grow in around the bottom. So each of these came from lower down on the plant and will kind of help fill around the base. But we could also take a piece off of this, so we could chop one stem, take this little stem, cut it shorter. I would take maybe one leaf off, but we could propagate that leaf. And now we could lay this portion right down at the base of the plant. And this leaf too, lay it right down at the base of the plant. And these leaves over time will actually root down back into the soil and regrow, just kind of add to the population around the base. If we look, I don't know if you can see this. Let me see if I can take it out of the pot just a little bit. See how good our camera is. If you look closely, oh, here's a baby. So here is a little baby that had already done that. So this leaf had fallen off, has the tiniest little root attached, has the tiniest little baby plant that is an exact clone of this bigger plant coming from one leaf that fell off. So that little one leaf just sat right on the soil surface, and what you do see is that as the baby plant and the root are growing from the tip, the leaf is getting squishy and kind of pruny because the leaf has given all of its water and all of its nutrients to the baby plant. And eventually the first leaf that started it all will die, just rot away. But then the baby will have roots and a life of its own, and it'll be ready to see the world and show it what it's got. And if you look where I was originally going to show you, get my pointer, is, Becky, help me out, can you see? So we have a tiny root that's actually just coming right off of this stem here, not even detached or anything. We have a tiny root there, and we also have like a whole, here's a root, and here's a cluster of roots down here.
You hold it down this way
down
a little?
This way?
There we go.
So a cluster of roots right here, which shows us that this plant is kind of sensing the moisture that's coming from the soil, which is very close to it. We're looking at, you know, a ½ inch from that rooted structure to the soil. Eventually it'll even just root all the way down all by itself. But each one of these little pieces that have grown from the base could be detached and either propagated separately or just kind of grown around the base of the plant as well. There's another tiny little baby. If I can get him out. Look at this baby. Here, I'll just put it in my finger. The tiniest little echeveria will grow into this big guy here. So from one leaf or from a low rosette, we can even cut this up at the top and start the top over itself and let the rest of the plant kind of fill in. So just because your succulent grew doesn't mean, you know, it's something's wrong with it or it's time to get a new one. You can chop it, make it shorter, propagate from it. There's tons of things to do with succulents as they grow, but we just don't always expect it to happen, I guess is the bottom line.
We have a question about if you care for orchids the same as succulents, unless you want to answer that in the comments later.
Orchids, no, you don't care for orchids the same as you care for succulents. I mean, orchids, first of all, there's a wide range of orchids. I can answer in more detail in the comments, but orchids do like bright light and they like infrequent waterings. The biggest difference is that most orchids grow out of soil completely. So their roots actually, a portion of the roots like to be in air. And so there's different soil medias for orchids, different watering, different fertilizing. So I know what you're saying, and some of the don't do's can be similar between succulents and orchids. Don't overwater them, don't overpot them, don't put them in, really water holding soil, all of that. But then there is specific soil that's preferable to succulents and cacti versus the soil and fertilizers and care that's specific to orchids. So I hope that's good for general, and then I'll go into more detail in the comments when I have some time. Flowers though, back to flowers for a second, because we saw the cute little flower on the kalanchoe. Usually succulents flowers are a little more subdued compared to cactus flowers. So I know you can see it because it is just like a neon yellow, this beautiful barrel cactus with this bright yellow flower coming out of the center. We have another version here, which I believe is a red or an orangish red flower. We don't have one open right now, but we'll have a flower opening soon, and all of these little nubbins that you see coming out of the cactus are flower buds that will be open soon. A cactus flower doesn't last very long. So they may last a day, they may last a few days, and then they're gone, and maybe another flower comes in its place, maybe not. So they flower. It's one of those things, you want to be there, you want to witness it, you want to celebrate, photograph, share it, and tomorrow you may not have a flower anymore. So it's just a moment in time, and that's one of those things that plants can teach us, is grab a moment in time, live in that moment, enjoy it for what it is, and tomorrow, if it's gone, your memory and your anticipation of the next moment is what carries you through, and not why doesn't it bloom all the time. When everything's good all the time, we kind of become desensitized to the wonders of life and the world. So when they're infrequent and stunning, they really knock you for a loop, and that's what I think really strikes us, as opposed to just living in the lap of beauty all the time, when we just forget what beauty is. So that was very philosophical.
Good Friday inspiration.
That, right? Yes. Plants do that for us. Now, for flowering, there's not much, you can't make your cactus flower or make it reflower or anything like that by adding fertilizer or special potions or really anything. Flowering happens in a cycle, so whether it's the right time of year to flower, or flowering happens when a cactus or a succulent experiences like a 20 to 25 degree change in daytime temperatures to nighttime temperatures. So usually, during the peak of summer, we don't have that big of a shift between day and night, but in the early spring and fall, we definitely feel, the change from daytime to nighttime temperatures. So most often we see a fall or winter bloom on a lot of cactus, or winter and into early spring bloom as they're experiencing that change in day and nighttime temperatures. Even in our homes, it may be 85 or whatever during the day and 60 at night, but harder because our homes are more climate controlled, harder to give the plants that change in temperature. So one way that you can instigate flowering of your indoor succulents and cactus would be to put them outside for the summer months. This gives your plants the opportunity to get natural light, which if your home is not the perfect lighting, can really help to bring out their colors, can help them grow quite a bit over the season instead of kind of struggling along indoors. And then you just want to bring them back in the house before frost. So for our Portland metro area, that's usually about the second or third week of October is a good time to bring them in. Definitely bring them in by Halloween. That way, you know, you're not into rain and cold, where the succulent or cactus has gotten maybe a little chilled or wetter than it wants to. By bringing it in about then, it's going to have a distinct change in the temperature that it's had and the temperature that it's in now. And that can often help to stimulate a bloom set, but it's not gonna like keep it blooming for the rest of the winter or anything like that. So you can affect it, but you can't necessarily prolong it.
Do snake plants flower?
Snake plants do flower. I mean, basically all plants flower, but it's not like some plant flowers are like, oh, look at this flower, and other plant flowers are like, oh, do you see that? It's flowering, you know? They're weird or they're insignificant. I mean, Japanese maples flower, right? Have you ever noticed that? Take a look. They happen to be like a vine maple, one of our native Japanese maples, is popular with pollinators. So not every flower is noticeable by us, but flowers definitely are a form of reproduction for plants. And so even though we may not really think of them as flowering, almost all plants do. The pests and disease issues like troubleshooting with cactus and succulents, first off is the biggest problem with succulents and cactus is crown rot or stem rot. And this is all caused more often caused by overwatering or watering too frequently combined with low light or lower light than the plant would prefer. So often the look of an early stage of overwatering can look like underwatering. So this little guy I was showing you earlier that's in the bath hydrating right now, kind of limp leaves, soft to the touch, not as like sturdy or turgid anymore, even a little bit pruny looking. That can be a sign of overwatered, just as easily as it can be interpreted as underwatered. But you notice that the next thing I did after noticing all of the signs that the plant was giving us is I pulled it out of the pot to look at the moisture in the soil. And now that it's sat for a few minutes in the water, so now see closely, you can still see the line of dry soil and wet soil, but it's been sitting in that little pitcher of water for not even 5 minutes, and you can see how by sitting on the bottom it pulls water further up into the top. If I had a limp, pruny looking plant, but I could feel that it was heavy and I could see that the soil is wet, then I would not water it. That would not be a sign of the plant telling me that it is dry and in need of water. That would be a plant that is overwatered and is now starting to have root rot. And the rotten roots, of course, can't take up water, so the plant starts to look like it's stressed for moisture, even though it has a ton of moisture in the soil already. I'll go back in the water for you. So I took apart a succulent that was struggling from root rot, and we can see some of the kind of discoloration and sunken patches on the leaf itself. So not only do we see kind of darker circles around the stems, and of course it's very limp, but we even see kind of a gray look towards the inner parts of the leaves where they attach to the stem. And the same with this one here, a very gray, discolored leaf, starting to look dry, but it actually was too wet instead. And that same very flexible, even kind of pruny feel to a leaf that should normally be really sturdy and thick and tough. So we took this apart and what kind of shattered apart as it was just, too rotten and fell apart. And I wanted to find out if any of the leaves on this plant were not rotten so that maybe we could propagate from it. The only leaf that I got off of it that looked even semi-decent, I think still has some rot at the very top here where it would grow from. So it's not likely that we'll be able to save this plant. But if you do have a plant that's going into root rot, you might as well kind of take it apart and see if you have any leaves that are not affected yet that you would be able to, as I've shown you, detach the leaf, lay it on the soil surface, and allow that leaf to root back again, because as you see, you can recreate your entire plant from a single leaf and salvage and learn and do better, and kind of save your credibility with that plant trying again. So it's possible to kind of rejuvenate or regrow from what you've already got. Is other than root rot and stem rot with overwatering, there are a few pests that succulents and cactus do experience. They are also relatively common with indoor plants, so if you grow tropical indoor plants or other indoor plants, you may also be familiar with these. The primary pest for most cactus and succulents is mealybug, and mealybug is a small bug that is usually on the stem or on the leaf surface, doesn't move around a lot, so as you look at the leaf, it's just kind of there, not like crawling around and messing around. It also looks a little bit like a bit of cotton or a bit of fuzz. It has a little bit of kind of a fuzz to it. As you look, it's about the size of a grain of rice though, or smaller. So that gives you an idea of how tiny a mealybug is. I look at my plants often with either a magnifying lens or a hand loop like a naturalist would use. If you've got like a jeweler's glass, whatever it is, look closely at your plants to inspect especially white or light colors, because mealybugs stand out, at least on many plants, being white. Now they can sometimes look like the cactus aerials, so that also makes it difficult to really if you become mealybug paranoid, you'll look at every cactus and be like, are there mealybugs there? Oh no, they're just aerials, so you're okay. But stressed plants, so plants that go to the wilting point beyond the interval that you should have watered, so like the example I'm showing you, really stressed and wilty and limp, that plant is more likely to come down with a pest due to the stress, as opposed to a plant that is just living a better life, having better regular hydration and not going through that stress period. So anytime we have a plant that we've kind of identified as, oh, I'm sorry, I let you go too dry and you're sort of stressed now, that plant should go on the watch list. So basically that plant should be inspected with the magnifying lens, with the jeweler's loop more closely for the next at least month to make sure that it doesn't come down with the pest due to the stress that it had when it was not being watered. Other than mealybugs, scale is also an occasional problem for succulents and cacti. Scale is another one that doesn't run around or crawl all over the plant. In fact, it looks kind of just like a piece of dirt or even like a scab or a flaw on the plant. The biggest difference is with a little stick or your fingernail, you should be able to detach it from the plant. And if it were like a blemish or a wound on the foliage itself, you wouldn't really be able to scrape it away or detach it. So sometimes, again, looking closely, seeing if you can get it off is going to tell you whether or not that was part of the plant or something sitting on the plant itself. Soil, well, if you get little 2-inch succulents like this, you could take them home and leave them in the containers that they're in now. So they're not in need of being potted up right away. In fact, these little pots will look nice set down inside of, well, this white, it doesn't look so great. This will look better in a black pot. So we just set this down into another little container, maybe put some stones on the bottom so that it sits up high enough, and then keep it in this so that we can lift it out, because this pot has no drain holes, so we want to water this individually, and that again gives us the ability to feel how wet it is. This feels pretty heavy. I can see that the soil is wet as well, so we know that this plant doesn't need water, but it becomes a lot harder to tell whether it needs water or not when you've potted it completely into its own container. So you can put them, just set them down into containers, or you can pot them together, and a lot of times the best containers for potting, especially groups of succulents, is either the rough terracotta, so unglazed clay, or again, this is another unglazed clay. Both are like low, shallow containers, so a wider container is more important than a deep container is for most succulents and cacti. And then we could put a group in a container like this, so we could do maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, what do you say, maybe 5, 5. So now we have a fun little collection together here, and we could pot these because we have a drain hole in the bottom of this container. So these could all be potted together in here, but as we know, this is not a sculpture. This is a living group of plants that are going to grow and change. So we make our perfect arrangement, and it's not going to stay like this forever. So as the plants grow, one may grow faster or taller or more than another, and we'll need to go back and possibly prune, possibly space, maybe even remove a plant as one of the plants grows bigger or better, so that they don't crowd one another at the same time. So when we pot them together into a container like this, we will take them out of their plastic pots, and we will use a cactus planting mix as the best draining soil for them. And cactus planting mix palm cactus and citrus planting mix. And then we have here on succulents and plumerias, if you're growing a plumeria at home. This is a really great soil, especially for those of us that may be prone to overwatering. Nice, rich, dark color, quite a bit of sand in the soil. So if we read the ingredients, recycled forest products, pumice. Pumice is this white rocky material. Now there's perlite, which is almost like styrofoam and really blows away. Pumice doesn't blow anywhere, it's heavier. So it stays where it's put, it doesn't necessarily float up in the soil like perlite does. But pumice is a volcanic rock that is basically heated. It doesn't like squish, but it's pretty lightweight, and it holds air pockets for space for air and water to move through the soil. So pumice, then sand, then bark fines, composted chicken manure, dehydrated chicken manure, feather meal, worm casting, kelp meal, bat guano, oyster shell, and dolomite lime. Those last two are just pH adjusters so that it's pH neutral. You see this beautiful soil does not have a lot of the white material that you see in a lot of potting soil, so it's a nice deep dark color, but the sand component is what really helps with drainage on that. So this we would lay down into the container and set our little succulents on, fill it in with more soil, and you could always do a top dressing of like sand or stones or something kind of colorful and interesting on top, because you will see some dirt since they're kind of smaller individual plants. So a little something over top kind of just makes it more decorative looking.
We have a little question from before. What's the best way to control mealybugs? Is that possible to answer?
So best way to control mealybugs really is an oil-based spray. Insecticidal soap works pretty well as well, but anytime you're using any kind of spray or treatment on a plant, it's best to like check a low leaf or a bottom leaf first to see what your spray does. So oil sprays and insecticidal soap on this beautiful succulent, this is the powder blue color of the succulent, is like a waxy coating on the leaf that can be removed. So if you just see this leaf, for example, as I touch it, I've taken the blue off. It's not exactly on my thumb or anything, but we can change the color of this plant and remove some of that beautiful powdery blue just by touching it. And so an oil or a spray on that could actually even turn it more green temporarily and take a lot of that powder look or blue away. So spraying the whole plant might change it to a way that you weren't expecting, in which case you might want to just, spray a Q-tip or spray a cotton swab and try to dab at the insect if you can spot them somewhere specifically. I'll even use just a Q-tip or cotton swab dipped in rubbing alcohol and then go straight after the insect itself, because the alcohol will dry out the bug, and without having to spray the whole plant, it's more tedious and takes some time, but it really is something you can kind of get in there with detail and get out without having to spray the whole thing. But always check, just like spot treating your carpet or whatever, like always check the little bottom low leaf and see what it's going to do first. The soil. Oh. Now, cactus and succulents can be turned into terrariums and fun plantings. So this is an open terrarium. We don't have a lid on top, but we've got both really kind of warty, crazy looking cactus in here, as well as two lovely kind of red colored sempervivums. And then just as I was describing, using a pretty sand and even some stones to kind of cover the soil on this just makes it a little bit more of a finished looking project. And an open topped terrarium, many of us know, dries out a lot more than a closed top. So a good candidate for succulents and cacti would be to put into an open top terrarium. Not so great with those that are closed top, which hold too much humidity. And also looking at leaf colors and leaf textures. See how many of these I can hold in my hand. We are looking at Kalanchoe and a couple of Echeverias here. So Kalanchoe, Echeverias. It's not going to be on the test, so it doesn't matter. Two different types of succulents, but three distinct colors. On our Kalanchoe, we see a little bit of a red tip on the edges of the leaves, but when we really look kind of straight down, it's predominantly green. Whereas this Echeveria, we have green new growth, but then it kind of fades to more of a red. Even on the back side of the leaves, we have a nice red coloration. And on this Echeveria, we have that same powder blue again that I can remove or affect with my fingers. So it's a waxy coating on the outside of the leaf. It's more green inside, but then that waxy coating gives that powdery blue look to it. The more colorful the foliage, the blue, gray, the reddish, green, more colorful foliage needs brighter light. So that means that this aeonium that I showed you in the very first example, this needs the brightest light of all of these plants because it's the least green. To the same extent, the greenest of all these plants is going to need the least light. So if your indoor environment where you want to grow your succulents isn't under a skylight and in a south-facing window, the brighter colored succulents may not thrive as well as the green succulents will in your house. And you may even see some of the color fade so that the plant starts more red or purple or pink, but it really kind of eventually turns more green. And that's because the plant's not getting enough light. So it increases the amount of chlorophyll it has so that it can eat what little sun it gets, just better. For lower light environments, greener plants will be better than dark colored or burgundy plants or different colored plants. And then this lovely little succulent, basically this is a Haworthia. And a Haworthia is also known as a zebra succulent or a zebra plant. As you can see, it's pretty little stripes. We happen to be catching a Haworthia with a flower spike, and as soon as this blooms, it's the most beautiful coral, kind of a peachy coral color on the flowers. Almost looks like it doesn't belong, to the plant. But Haworthias are one of the few succulents that are tolerant of partial sun. So Haworthia could grow in your north-facing window and be happy, whereas our Echeveria would not be happy in the north-facing window. So yes to lower light, not lower light for this guy. So if you do have kind of compromised sun indoors, you can definitely still grow some succulents. Just go with the greener varieties and then even little Haworthia here. With green though, you can have a lot of fun with green. Three essentially green succulents, but all with different shapes, textures, leaf kind of profiles. So just because they're all the same color doesn't mean that they're all going to look the same, and you won't have any kind of contrast from one to the other. And the same with our jade plant here. Beautiful, succulent, easy to grow, perfect for bright light, but also tolerant of a little bit of lower light indoors. Here we have a jade leaf that's dropped. Fell off the jade, landed on the dirt, made a little root, and now this jade's going to grow its whole own new jade plant from that one leaf. Now I don't want to see everybody coming into the garden center filling their pockets with single leaves of succulents. We'll watch you, we know, but it's fun to even just pull apart some of your own succulents and propagate from your own leaves, just to see that it works, to watch the process, and even a way to, again, salvage a plant that maybe you thought was either outgrown its space, overgrown its companions, or might be struggling for root rot or other related problems. Last thing I want to show you, how to transplant or handle a a cactus that has a lot of spines. When you do get a cactus or succulent and want to transplant it, you may want to put this little cutie into this container. We can transplant it because it has a hole, so it's a nice size for it. We don't want to overpot a succulent or a cactus either, so always kind of go into gradual container sizes. So to get this out of the container, you can see how spiny it is. So in order to do this safely and not be pulling cactus thorns out of my fingers for the next week, I'm going to fold up a paper towel. So I'll show you how this started, and that is we here at Dennis 70s use the trifold paper towel. So this is a trifold paper towel, but it doesn't matter, Balmy, whatever it is. Fold it up. So we do the trifold, that's nice. Then I'm going to fold it again in half, then I'm going to fold my half in half. Really, you just want a fairly thick band that feels like it's going to give you enough protection from the spines on one side and your fingers on the other side. If your cactus is fatter, more amply proportioned than this little tube, then you would extend it by adding another paper towel about halfway in here and just making it a little bit longer so you could go all the way around it. You can use a pair of jeans, like a heavy flannel or cotton t-shirt, just rolled up and then around the plant as well. But this makes a little belt. The belt we're going to wrap around the spiny midsection of the cactus, all the way around. Once we get to the back to the end, you can give it a little twist, and that twist just tightens the grip. And then we're going to give this a little squeeze so that it comes loose from the container and out it comes. Now we can put a little bit of soil in this pot, add our cactus, keep the band on while you fill more soil in, or you're going to poke your fingers while you're trying to kind of, settle the soil. And once it's planted and secured and in place, then we can untwist and remove the protection, and there you go. Again, your fingers are safe, the cactus is safe. Looks like I might have dented one or two of the little prickles, but it'll be fine. If you get any soil as you're planting that gets kind of stuck or trapped in all of the cactus spines, you can use like a chopstick, a toothpick. You can use old paint brushes or even makeup brushes to just kind of get in there and just get that little bit of dirt or soil out so that the plant looks clean again. But if you're going to put a lot of dirt on, like a bigger planting, and you're going to kind of pour more soil on, I will do the same idea. I will give all of the cactus hats so that I can put my soil around without accidentally getting dirt all over the cactus because it's so hard to get it off. And then once I finish adding soil, I can take all the hats off and they're safe. That, I think, about covers it. You should all have access to the handout, which is posted in the comments section. And you'll see some like frequently asked questions that are just at the bottom of the comments or bottom of the handout. Why does it get mushy and brown? We've kind of addressed that. Can I move my cactus outside in the summer? We addressed that. How can I start a new cactus off my old cactus? Now you know. Afraid about overwatering. What can I do to make it bloom? So if those 5 questions go beyond or don't cover your basic questions, then please be sure to send us a message on either this comment thread or send it to our website, and we will answer your question and learn that we need to do better next time. Again, thanks for watching and happy gardening.